Welcome to Weekly Fix. I'm your co-host Jacob, and joining me as always, my good friend Zane. And we are going to be finally breaking down the finale of the Bad Batch this week. We got a lot of Star Wars stuff with it recently, having been May the 4th, National Star Wars Day, so there's a whole bunch of Star Wars news to talk about. So that's going to kind of dominate today's episode. But before we get into all the fun Star Wars stuff to talk about, Zane, how's your week been?
My week's not been great. It's started feeling bad last night. Went to Med Express this morning, got strep, so I've been fighting that all day. Just not feeling good. And then, but we had a good weekend. So family was in, so we got to visit with them, and that was really nice. But rough start to the week.
Yeah, it's never fun when your week starts with being sick. I'm kind of in the same boat where I'm not sick, but Danielle actually just got diagnosed with a sinus infection. So she has been battling through that. So she's been struggling, but her medicine's finally started to really kick in, and she actually had a pretty good day today. So that means our week has started to get a little bit better already. However, like I said, we had a lot of fun stuff to talk about. We have the Bad Batch is over. We got a trailer for the Acolyte. Tales of the Empire has dropped officially. So lots of Star Wars stuff to talk about. But before we get into Acolyte, before we get into Tales of the Empire, why don't we break down this last episode of the Bad Batch, and let's talk about the series as a whole. So, Zane, let's start with the finale. What did you think of the finale and how they wrapped up the story?
So, with the finale, I thought this is exactly what Bad Batch Season 3 should have been. I thought that was an incredibly interesting story. There were some things I thought that they were missing, but honestly, this is the kind of story that they needed to tell the entire season. If they could have told the breakout and Echo planning and giving us more throughout the entire season of her breakout from this place, instead of her getting captured twice, just make it harder to break out the first time. And then that makes this one, don't let her break out the first time, and it adds more stakes, it adds more tension, it adds more difficulty, and it makes us buy into the fact that this is going to be difficult. When you get out in the second episode of the season, the second breakout doesn't seem as intense, it doesn't seem as much stakes. We don't know what's going to happen. But I really liked what they did with it. I thought it was a very good episode. It was my favorite episode of the season. I don't even think there's any question to that. I also really liked the ending. I thought the ending was really good. It's kind of cool how we get to see where the story's going. Obviously, I think we're gonna get more Omega in the future. And so that's pretty cool. And then also to kind of give the peace, Clone Force 99 a little bit of peace there at the end. So that was really nice. But I was completely satisfied with the conclusion, which is nice considering how disappointed I've been with the season as a whole. What about you?
I think the show ended probably in the best way that it could have with the story we have gotten. I also agree with what you said about having her not have ever escaped and letting this be the first true time she got to escape. I think it would have been, we see that emotional scene between her and Crosshair on the bridge after they kill Rampart. That scene would have been even more impactful if she would have never escaped. Maybe she sacrificed herself to let Crosshair escape originally, and Crosshair is the one that comes back with the team and, sets all these things up. I think that would have been a better storyline, because like you said, stakes would have been higher because she never escaped. There was never a chance that she got out. So you kind of throughout this whole episode, you knew everything was going to be fine. Obviously, it's the finale, but they've done it before. So like you said, the stakes weren't as high. You almost didn't even expect anyone to die. There was a few times I was like, oh, maybe. But ultimately, I never really felt like, oh, it looks like Crosshair might die here, or it looks like Wrecker's going to die, or something like that. So I feel like if we would have not ever seen them escape, and maybe Crosshair had escaped by the skin of his teeth, I think then we would have had a lot more stakes built on this final episode. But like you said, overall, I think this is what we needed to get more of throughout this whole season. And I really think this episode benefited from being about 50 minutes long. I know we're saying, like, we wish we would have gotten, less of that filler stuff, which is kind of funny what I'm about to say, but I do wish we would have gotten longer episodes, because a lot of that filler I don't think would have been as bad if it was just, part of episodes here and there, right? If it was still letting the story get progressed and we were still getting some of the filler, but at least we were getting some story in every episode, I think that would have helped this season a whole lot more, rather than having those episodes a week where it literally didn't progress the story at all.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think maybe minimizing the episode count and extending some of
Yeah,
the episodes helps that filler feel less like filler.
yeah.
Um, the one, the doctor, is it Ailish? Dr. Ailish? The one who kind of switched sides during Identity Crisis. Um, I really liked her arc in it and how she changed sides. I thought that was really good. Um, uh, Going from really wanting to be in charge of necromancy to then helping after she sees the evil that they're actually doing with the children. I thought that was a really good add to the show. But I really didn't. Um, I was surprised that we never saw Tech. You know, you said he's never gone unless there's proof, right? But we never saw him, right?
Yeah, and I'm actually that was one of the things I wanted to touch on. I'm so happy, as much as I love Tech, I am so happy that they did not bring him back because that would have made the episode when he died so much less impactful. And I felt like that was, looking back through the season, the series as a whole, that was by far the best episode we got. I still think about how good that episode was and how high the stakes felt during that episode. So yeah, I truly did think there was going to be, he had gotten turned into one of those super soldiers that Rampart had. I really did think that it was going to turn out to be one of them, but it just goes to show sometimes it's just a character that they kind of, I think they did that on purpose. I think they wanted you to think a little bit that that could be Tech, but at the end of the day, it was just one of the other clones that had been turned to this super soldier. So I was very, very happy that he was not turned, it wasn't Tech. I think that made the story as a whole so much more impactful.
I agree, especially with just so many fake outs in Star Wars,
Yeah.
especially here since the Disney age. It was nice that that was actually genuine, um, and it does add stakes for the future that characters are not immortal. They don't always just come back, with robotic legs. Um, so it is nice, even though I love the robotic leg story. Um, season two was peak of Bad Batch,
Yeah.
and season
Yep.
three definitely dropped the ball throughout it. But I was very happy that I could be satisfied with the finale, because I think they did do the. I guess the problem I'm having with season three is that I think season three could have just been told with the last episode, and I would have been just as satisfied. Like
It,
we didn't
it
really
does.
get any progress from Crosshairs. Like and Crosshairs wanted to kind of have the whole story, but we never really figured out his hand twitch. Like I assumed that they would have tried to get that mental block out of him before the end of the episode, but then they didn't really touch on it. I know he made the shot, but it didn't really. His hand was still shaking. Like it wasn't like he overcame that mental block. Um, and we really didn't see a crazy amount of trust from Hunter and them to really combine. So it seems like when you give us 15 episodes, his arc should have been completely flushed out, and I just don't feel like it was.
So I actually kind of have a different take on the Crosshair thing. I really liked what they did with him in the fact that when he lost his hand, I feel like that was the thing that was holding him back. That was the thing that was still holding him tied to his past of like the mistakes he had made and the way he had turned his back on his brothers and Omega. I feel like whenever that finally happened, when he lost that hand, that was the last thing really kind of holding him because every time he looked at that hand, I think it reminded him of what he had done. The fact that he had turned his back on them, that he had done all these things. When that hand was gone, I think that was kind of the burden lifted off of him. Like, you know what? I can move on from what I've done in the past. So I personally did really appreciate what they did with the story.
Okay, so you liked him losing it in that moment.
Yes, I thought that. I don't necessarily know that I like that the super soldiers were the ones that took it from him. I almost wish it would have been a bigger character like Rampart. Maybe Rampart cuts his hand off after they've captured him. I feel like that would have made a little bit more sense, because Crosshair kind of was arguably the main character of this season with Omega. Those two definitely had the spotlight. So I would like to have seen a bigger character rather than just an unnamed super soldier be the one that gets the privilege of taking that from him. But overall, I do like that they did that, and that's kind of the symbolism that they went with there.
Yeah, I like the symbolism you point out there. I just wish they would have handled that whole arc a little bit better for just like even when Omega was like teaching him, I mean, several episodes back, like, hey, maybe, there's nothing wrong with you. The doctor checked you out. Maybe this is mental. I really wish they would have kind of dived into that a little bit and allowed him to mentally overcome that, as opposed to having to have his hand cut off in order to feel like he could move on. You know,
Yeah.
um, I feel like they could have handled that better and made him a stronger character. Now you touched on the super soldiers. What was your opinion of that? How did you feel that played out?
I really liked it, and I love that all the soldiers kind of seem to be, members of the Bad Batch, just in this kind of
Like
form.
anti Bad Batch?
Yes, I really thought that was cool. And again, this is one of those things I wish we would have got to see earlier in the season. I think it would have been a lot cooler if we would have got to see the Bad Batch really go face to face with those guys earlier on in the season and really get to see some, like, you know what I mean? It would have been nice to see them, Wrecker really stack up against his guy, Hunter against his. Obviously Tech's not there, so we would be missing that one person. But I think Echo could have kind of taken that place, because I think Tech and Echo are very similar characters in the fact that they're both kind of the people that find out all the intel and all that type of stuff. So I would have loved to have seen that story develop earlier in the season, but I really like that we even got it at all. I thought it was really cool, and it kind of just goes to show, Rampart said, if you guys can survive this, you guys are going to make great. I forget what the word that he used for them was, but we're using super soldiers. I think it was cool that Rampart was trying to replicate what they already were.
Yeah. No, yeah, trying to capture that lightning in the bottle moment again.
Yes.
Which, I mean, in Clone Force 99 is awesome. Like,
Yeah.
I really do enjoy them. They're awesome. One of the things I disliked was how hurt Wrecker was the entire episode.
Yeah.
Kind of faking out that he was going to die the whole time, and then he's just fine. I didn't really see why he was as hurt as he was. I mean, I mean, obviously, like, they were trying to display it with his armor being shredded there at the front, but like, they really milked that for a long time, and like, could barely move, and then all of a sudden he was throwing people off of out windows, and I was like, man, like, this injury is really touch and go.
Yeah, I feel like that was one of those things where, we've been talking about it a lot, where the stakes just didn't feel high this entire season. I feel like that was one of those things where they were like, we got to make the stakes feel higher than they really are. And I feel like that's kind of something they were forcing. Like, hey, Wrecker's really hurt. He could die. Even though we kind of saw him just kind of take over moments and, use his super strength and all that stuff. So I feel like that's kind of where that came from. I feel like it came from a lack of storytelling, honestly, and them trying to, I guess, replicate the stakes being high when they really weren't in certain scenes, because he does end up pulling it out. So I agree with that. It was a little frustrating, because, again, there's so much stuff they could have just... all this stuff could have happened earlier in the season, and we wouldn't be having a lot of these complaints that we're having now. So that was a bother of mine as well. I don't think you're alone in that. I think a lot of other people were like, is he really that hurt if he's still able to, take on 2 or 3 of these super soldiers at a time?
Yeah. And then one thing I wanted to ask you was, how did you feel? Now, this whole episode, I can't help but think, like, the message is the cavalry has arrived. I kept expecting Rex to show up.
Yeah.
Like, how do you feel that he's not a part of this final episode, even though he was throughout the season?
Well, my problem with it is, constantly you hear Echo talk about it, is this is what they've been looking for. Rex has been looking for Tantus. They've been looking for this facility because it is such a big deal, right? There's so many clones here. They have to figure out, what the deal is. How can they get here? How can they figure out all this stuff? And I think ultimately what they meant by the cavalry has arrived is the other clones already inside of the facility.
Right.
But it did kind of feel like a little bit of a letdown, because a name like that, it totally sounds like, hey, we're finally going to find out what happened to Cody. Like, we saw Cody earlier in the season and never saw him again. We see Wolf in one of the episodes this season. Never see him again. I feel like there was a lot of that I was just waiting on, that we were going to finally get some conclusions as to what some of these clones that we saw for one episode, and then you never see them again. So that was a little bit of a letdown for me. And I like the idea of them being like, hey, the cavalry is these clones that have been captured here. I like that storytelling. Don't think it's bad. But it definitely was a little bit of a letdown for me personally, because of how big of a Rex fan I am. I feel like it could have been really, really cool if we would have just got to see an all-out war on Tantus. It felt like again, the stakes did feel decently high at some points, but there was a lot of times where I was like, I feel like they're just kind of getting away with too much sneaking around. And then, we did get to see a little bit of a fight there inside of that training area, but I really just wanted just all out war. I wanted ships fighting in the air. I wanted people dropping out of gunships. I wanted, all of that. I think that would have really elevated the story overall.
Yeah, and I think kind of to avoid all that, they had that creature that Omega released. What was
Yeah,
that creature named?
the Zillow
What?
Beast.
The Zillow Beast. Yeah, yeah. I think kind of to compensate for the storytelling aspect of being able to infiltrate a place like Tantus, they really had that Zillow Beast take kind of be their like golden key, essentially. Like,
Yeah.
Okay, well, like people won't complain if we have this massive monster destroy half the base. Um, so it kind of makes a little bit more sense, but I kind of feel like that's kind of a cop out. The best part about that was that we got to see Omega's creativity on display,
Yep.
which that's like her superpower, right? You see it in her board games and her ability to think and logic, and so we do get to see her kind of be very contributing to this escape plan, just in sheer mass of escape. But I do kind of think they use that as okay, well, if we do this, we don't really need as many people.
100%, and that's why I was so disappointed, because I think it would have been a lot cooler if we did get that all-out war. So if you look back over Bad Batch as a whole, we really didn't get much of that. I mean, there was some times where there was a good amount of fighting going on, but it never felt like, those like Clone Wars-esque style battles that we got, or even Rebels had some really big fights. It never really felt like this show had that moment where there's like, everybody is here, right? Like, I want to see Rex, I want to see the Bad Batch, I want to see them all working together. We got a little bit of that earlier in the season when the one super soldier broke into their facility, but it was so quick and so short, and just the fact that the one super soldier was kind of able to mess up everything, that kind of hurt that part of it for me. So that's why I was let down. I really wanted to see just that giant battle. But like you said, I really like that they touched on the creativity of Omega. I loved the scene when the Zilla Beast, the Bad Batch hear him, and they're like, Crosshair says, "Is that Echo or Omega?" And Hunter and Wrecker both look at each other and they're like, Omega.
Yeah,
I loved that
clearly.
stuff. Yeah, so I think they did a really good job wrapping up the story. I think we both agree with that. There was definitely some stuff that we could both agree on also that they could have done better. But overall, as a show, as a finale, I think they did a good job wrapping up the story with what the story we had been given up to that point. I don't know any other way that they could have done it and it would have made any more sense. So I have to be happy with what we got. So that leads me to this. Where do you rate this episode? Just this episode, just as a finale. What would you rate this episode?
I would rate this an 8. This episode is an 8 for me. It's enjoyable. I wouldn't mind watching this episode again.
Yeah.
There was enough in it, a satisfying conclusion. It wasn't perfect. There's complaints. It could have been a lot better for me, but definitely a best entry in season 3 by far for me.
I think I'm right there with you, and I don't like doing half points. But this one almost feels like it could be an 8.5. I'm gonna give it an 8 though, because of the things that we've talked about and the things that I really wish we would have got that we didn't get. So I think 8 is very fair. I think, like I said, it's the best way they could have wrapped it up. And I am still a big fan of the Bad Batch. You even talked about it. The Bad Batch is a cool concept, and they're a really cool group. And I do think they did a good job of letting us grow attached to these characters. I feel like that was probably the strong suit of this show. Maybe the storytelling was lacking, but you do really feel connected to the characters and their struggle. And I feel like this episode really elevated that. So moving on from the episode, now that we have Bad Batch completely finished, we have a complete work here. Where are you ranking it on a scale of 1 to 10, just as a whole series?
Oh man, that's really tough, because the first season isn't. I really enjoyed the first season.
Yep.
The second season, I feel like, is some of the best animated Star Wars we get.
Yep.
And then I was really let down with this season, where it's almost a 5. Like, if I was to rewatch the Bad Batch, I would skip to the last episode.
Yeah.
Of season 3. I don't think I'd rewatch the whole thing. So that really hurts it. I probably would rate the entire season as a 7 now, just because of the third season. Without the third season, I would probably go 8.5.
Hmm.
We don't like to do half points, but for the season as a total, but the third season for me just kind of broke it down. Um, just not pulling through, not living up to the same levels as the previous season. So I think I'm gonna rate it a 7.
And I think that's perfectly fair. We talked a little bit about this off the podcast. I'm going to give the show overall an 8. I really did like season 1 and season 2 so much that it still is one of my favorite. We haven't gotten a whole lot of animated stuff out of Star Wars, so it's easy to say it's your favorite when there's really only 3 projects that you're talking about. So it's in my top 3, but
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah.
I
Well, we
really
got
did
we got
still
Tales
like
of the
it.
Jedi now. Tales of the
Well,
Jedi,
I
Tales of
don't
the
necessarily
Empire.
consider those because where they're shorts. Kind of,
Yeah.
I don't really consider those as part of the animated Star Wars. Even though it definitely is. I kind of consider those their own category. But I'm gonna go with an 8 on this one. I still really did like the story overall. I kind of feel like I don't when I rewatch something, which I don't do very often. I don't like skipping stuff. But man, it would be really hard to not skip some episodes in season 3 because it's just a lot of nonsense. One episode that stuck out to me that I actually thought had some good action and some good um, fun parts, fun Star Warsy moments, was the episode where Finnick, Hunter, and Wrecker go to fight the praying mantis dude. I actually thought that was a decent episode, but just the fact of where it took place in the season, after right before we're getting ready to meet Asajj and all that stuff, it really, looking back, I'm like, they really probably shouldn't have. They wasted a whole episode doing that.
Yep.
And then I look back at the Asajj episode, and we've talked about this before. I feel like that was a whole lot of nothing too, especially now with the finale being over. We never saw her again. We never got any, we do get indication that Omega clearly does not go train to be a Jedi, but that makes that episode look even worse now. Like, it
Oh,
really was a
absolutely.
waste of time. So there would be a lot of times where I would be like, I don't know that I necessarily would want to rewatch this. But overall, I think I'm going to stick with my 8 as a whole. Like you said, if it wasn't for season 3, I would have been very hard not to give this a 9 as a whole show, because I really loved season 1 and 2. But I'm going to stick with my 8. I think season 3 did hurt it quite a bit. But that leads me to my next question. We do have those 3 projects. We have the Clone Wars, Rebels, and Bad Batch. What would your ranking be for those 3? Give me your 1 through 3 order for those.
Number 1 is Rebels, then Clone Wars, and then Bad Batch.
Yeah.
Now, I think we talked about this a little bit offline, but Clone Wars season 7, I think, is the best animation we've got. I think it stands top. But Rebels as a collective work is significantly better than the Clone Wars because of how much skippability there is throughout that. There are entire episodes in a row that you're like, hey, I need to skip all of these.
Yep.
And so for that, he can't be number 1 because consistency. And then Rebels, I think, has some of the coolest Jedi, I guess, off the beaten path, kind of with the nature and the animal connection that Ezra has, and just everything with him. I absolutely love the aspect that they went more connected. And throughout all of Star Wars, the Jedi are always the natural and connected to the light more so, and the droids are anti, they're material and they're not organic. So it kind of kicks that the Jedi are more protectors of nature. But it really dived down into that with Rebels, and I really enjoyed that, especially with even the World Between Worlds and everything. That they just had some really, really cool parts of Rebels that I enjoyed tremendously. And then Bad Batch would be last, just because I enjoy the Force more than I do clones. Anytime I could choose between a Jedi or a clone to watch, I'm going to pick a Jedi, and that's just my own personal flavor. I know Rex is your favorite character, but he doesn't break my top 10. And so because of that, that's kind of where I stand.
I have the same ranking. I think you hit it right on the head. If we were just talking about season 7 of Clone Wars, it's hard not to just say it's head and shoulders above everything else. Rebels as a collective work, I've thought back on it, and when I did rewatch it a little bit in preparation for the Ahsoka show, I really realized how good the filler was in that it didn't feel like filler a lot of the time. It actually felt like it was still pushing the story forward, whether that was just through character development or anything like that. I still really did enjoy the filler. I do, everybody knows Captain Rex is my favorite character in Star Wars. One thing that I do think, because it is Star Wars and the Jedi are so cool and they're such a big aspect of it, I know that Bad Batch was not meant to be based about Jedi and stuff, but when there are no Sith and there are no Jedi and something that's Star Wars related, I think we got a lot of that, and that's why a lot of people don't enjoy things like the Rogue One and the Solos of the world, is because we're missing that big aspect of Star Wars. I do think sometimes it can hurt a little bit when you don't have that cool moment where the Jedi shows up and saves the day, right? That we do miss those moments when you don't have them. So I do think that kind of hurts the Bad Batch a little bit, not having those type of moments, even though the Jedi aren't the main characters of that show. I get all that. I think that's what makes the Clone Wars and Rebels so good, right? Because we do have those awesome duels, we get those cool moments. But like you said, I think that's a great ranking. I would rank them the same way, with Rebels at 1, Clone Wars at 2, and Bad Batch at 3. But overall, I think you can't go wrong with any of them. I think they're all good watches. Maybe some a little better than others, but overall, I still did enjoy Bad Batch as a whole. And I'm excited to see if we do get any more Star Wars animation in the future.
Well, I think we'll probably see not Echo, Omega.
Yeah,
Do you think we'll see her pilot journey?
I hope so. I actually told a bunch of I don't know why I just stuttered there so bad, but I actually told a bunch of my friends I really hope we do get some sort of story with Omega. I really like the idea that she's going to join the rebellion as a pilot. Really cool callback to the fact that her and Hera know each other from Star Wars Rebels, because they did meet in the show. So I really love the idea of Hera and Omega reuniting and getting to see them go on some epic pilot battles. I think that would be incredible to see some of that interaction again. So I really, really hope we do. It's just interesting that we don't have any information on something like that. You think with Star Wars Week being this week, maybe that's something they're holding off for Star Wars Celebrations. But it would have been really nice to just know a little bit more if we're getting a full animated show again here in the future.
Yeah, and I feel like if we didn't get that in the future, there would have been no reason to show her step out at the end.
Yeah.
That would have been more of a just kind of see where the Bad Batch was in peace. I don't see any reason to tell where she's going, other than to hint at something of the future. Now, maybe that's to try to get the fans excited to ask for it. A lot of times some of this stuff only gets greenlit when there's fan excitement. So maybe they're kind of testing the waters to see if people want that. But yeah, I definitely think we're going to see her in the future.
Which makes me very excited, because I think that could be some really cool stuff. But, continuing with Star Wars animation talk, we did get Tales of the Empire. Now, I have not got a chance to watch any of it yet. I know that's very disappointing for not just you, but me as well, because I'm dying to talk about it. I'm dying to watch it. But you have watched it. Have you completed it?
Yep, I watched all 6 episodes.
So, try not to do too many spoilers, but if you want to touch on some things, that's perfectly fine as well. Did it hold up to Tales of the Jedi?
Did it hold up to Tales of the Jedi? I would say no.
Okay.
Tales of the Jedi, and one of the issues is that the first 3 episodes are all about Morgan Elsbeth, which she's a cool character. I've enjoyed everything that we've seen her in. Introduced to her in The Mandalorian, and then got a bunch of her in the Ahsoka show. Was she in Clone Wars?
No, she was not.
Okay, just want to make sure. And then so then we kind of get to see her intro. Is essentially what the first 3 episodes are. She just does not have the same weight as a Count Dooku Yaddle episode.
Yeah.
And it's not just because it's just the Night Sisters aren't as interesting, and they don't dive into it as much, especially episode 3. I felt like episode 3 was a real letdown for the finale to kind of her introduction. It was cool, I enjoyed it, but as far as comparatively to Count Dooku, Yaddle, Ahsoka, those Tales of the Jedi were significantly better, in my opinion. And then the second half was with Barriss, the second So the last 3 episodes was
Hmm.
with Barris, and those are really good. I have my issues. I have one massive issue, but I can't talk about it because of spoilers. But it was very enjoyable. I really love the short 15-minute animation content. I think it's the appropriate time and the appropriate story told in a compact, like, nice delivery. I think this is really what they kind of need to be putting out for the in betweeners. So if you're trying to tell a story in between two things, like, this is the way to do it, and I really like it. Especially if we're going to get more of these characters in the future for movies or what have you. This would be a really good way to kind of bridge the gaps. Like, if we would have got this for, and I'm losing his name, but for the Ahsoka series. Um, what was the main villain's name? Not the main anti Jedi guy. He wasn't a
Oh,
Sith, but he
Balin
was a Sith.
Skull.
Yeah, if we would have got this for Balin before the Ahsoka series, that would have been absolutely perfect. And I think if they could use it timed a little bit more appropriately instead of releasing it after the fact, or even the Morgan Elsbeth, if they could have released these 3 episodes before the Ahsoka series so that we're kind of just a little bit more acquainted with the character, I think that's really how they need to be releasing that, and that really ups the value of these shows.
So you would rather have these before we ever get introduced to these characters?
Yes. I
Okay.
feel like these are just such a good introduction to the character. Um, I felt like the Barris was a very good placement. You know, um in contrast to Morgan Elspeth, I think hers is actually really good because we got introduced to her character, and this is after we got introduced to her. So this is a continuation of her story, not
Hmm.
a tell before. So I like that. So there are parts that I like. The placement just needs to be appropriate for when it kind of comes out, and can kind of excite you for the characters when they appear. Um, I don't know, but that's just kind of how I kind of felt out about it. I was like, I didn't really want to know much more about Morgan Elsbeth. There's so
Yeah.
many more Sith that I would rather have a short about.
So, how would you feel about, we saw very little Asajj in the Bad Batch, barely even a whole episode's worth of her. Do you think she would benefit from something like this, maybe showing us what she's been up to in the time in between Clone Wars and the Bad Batch, or maybe what she's up to after the Bad Batch? Or is that something you would prefer to see as a whole animated show in and of itself?
Well, it depends on what story they have to tell. Now, if the story can be encapsulated within 3 15-minute episodes, or even 6 15-minute episodes, like, yes, that's how I think it should be done. Whenever you can tell, you kind of always push it back to movies and how much you can tell in 2 hours of content. Like, you need to be effective at telling your stories. And so time is our most valuable asset. And so if you're wasting my time, I'm not enjoying your content as much.
Hmm.
So if you can tell, like, they should be able to tell what's been up with Asajj in less than 15 episodes. Like, she does not need a Bad Batch season to tell her story. They can do that effectively. Like, it should not take the Lord of the Rings movie time length to tell her story.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So,
agree. I think it's an interesting topic though, because I know a lot of people really do like these shorter form stuff. But like you just said, I know I haven't had time to watch it, and we're talking about how it's easier to watch them, but it is easier overall. Like, I am going to be able to sit down and watch this probably this weekend. I'll be able to watch the entire thing, and I think it's like an hour and a half worth of content. That's a lot easier to swallow than if I had gotten behind in a show or something. So it is something that I think, Disney as a whole is probably looking at doing. Like, hey, do we want to spend the money to make these long episodes, these long seasons, and all that stuff, when a lot of people are just happy with these 15-minute episodes? I think it's really something we might start to see a whole lot more of, and I don't necessarily think that's even a bad thing.
yeah. And I also like that they release it all at once. If they were releasing these weekly, I think we mentioned it last week, like, that would be really rough. But I
Yeah.
do really like that they release it all at once.
Well, I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I'm excited to get into it. Like I said, hopefully I'll have it finished by this weekend. Um, And I love the Star Wars short stuff. I think it's really good. I loved Tales of the Jedi. So just to hear that it is still good, I kind of had that feeling. I think a lot of people were let down just when we got told it was going to be Morgan Elsbeth. A lot of people were hoping it was Balin or even Shin, his apprentice. I think a lot of people really wanted that story told much more than Morgan Elsbeth. So to hear that was one of your complaints, I'm not surprised at all by that. But, continuing with the Star Wars news, we did get another trailer for the Acolyte. Now I gotta say, I was able to watch this because it doesn't, that's an easy little thing to get through real quick while you're on your lunch break or something like that at work. What did you have? You got a chance to watch the Acolyte trailer?
Yeah, I've watched it a few times now, just to kind of prepare for this, and it's pretty interesting. Well,
It
I
is.
kind of want to hear your thoughts on it first before I dive into it,
Okay. Well,
just to kind of see where you stand on it.
so I think you used the perfect word for this. Interesting. Um, I'm not going to say I'm not excited for it because I'm actually very excited for it, and I think these trailers are really good. It's just interesting. We're going to keep using that word. Some of the things they're trying to do with it. For instance, one of the main things I wanted to talk about was it seems like one of these main, villains of the show, potentially, obviously as a trailer, they could trick us all, is using knives kind of as her main weapon. For some reason, watching that, it's really cool. I think it is a very cool aspect of it. It doesn't feel Star Warsy though. I don't know, something about it is throwing me off. So like I said, it's not necessarily a knock on it. By the time the show is out and that I've got through it, I might love that. I might think it was a really cool touch. But it is something that every time I saw it in the trailer, I was like, that's a little interesting. That's a little not Star Warsy to me. It kind of reminded me of, and we both love Andor, but before Andor and them get ready to go storm, and steal all this money from the Empire, they kind of have like AK-47s out in that field. Those were their weapons, and that was one of those things that kind of took me out of the Star Wars feel. So this is one of those things that did that. Like I said, maybe they'll do it in a way that it doesn't bother me at all once we get a full show. But that was one thing that I think is interesting. We've talked about it a lot. I've heard a lot of people complain about, the Jedi talk about in Episode 1 how the Sith had been extinct for, ever. It's been a long time since we've seen a Sith Lord. And a lot of people are complaining and their worries about this show is, well, how are they going to figure that out if the Jedi do know that there are still Sith? I've heard some different theories on some people talking about things like that. That, maybe all the people that do see the Sith have to die, or maybe it's one of these things that the Jedi just try to cover up and don't tell everybody. So I'm interested to see what they go with that. We finally got to see the red lightsaber and everything, which I love seeing that stuff. I always think it's super cool. The villain looks very interesting with that red lightsaber. They even make the saying, "What are you?" He doesn't look like a person. So I'm excited to see that storyline. I'm excited to see where they go with all that. But that's just my overall thoughts of the trailer as a whole so far.
Yeah, and so actually, one of the interesting things about you touched on the knives. So we think that maybe they didn't have their kyber crystal call to them. So in the High Republic era, when younglings would go to get their kyber crystals from Ilum, if a kyber crystal didn't call to them, they didn't become a Jedi.
Yeah.
So they're thinking maybe some of the things I've been reading online, they're thinking maybe this Sith is actually a reject Jedi who's angry that she did not become a Jedi, and so now she's out for vengeance because a kyber crystal didn't call to her, and so she's using the knives instead of a lightsaber because she doesn't have one. And then the red lightsaber comes after she purges a Jedi's lightsaber, infuses the kyber crystal with hate and turns it red after she kills the Jedi. So that's kind of like what kind of the thought of what's going to happen, the storyline, from what I've been reading.
Well, I think that would be really cool because they do make the mention in the trailer, someone's murdering Jedi. And I think that's going to be really cool for the Jedi to have to learn to deal with, is that there's someone out there that is capable of matching their abilities. And it would totally make sense if it is a reject Jedi, because even though they might not have gotten their, kyber crystal, maybe they never really trained with a lightsaber. They were still trained up to a certain age, so it would make sense that they would have some abilities and things like that, and have a basic understanding of the Force. And who knows what they go and do off when they're eventually an outcast. They might go and train harder than all the other Jedi. So I wouldn't mind that storyline, but I don't know if for you, if that, even though that might be the story they go with, does having something like that kind of take you out of the Star Warsy feel?
Not necessarily, as long as they give a reason for it.
Okay.
In the comics they have guns and lead. It's just, it's just something that they don't have enough resources to actually fund. Lasers are significantly cheaper, and the refill, they don't run out of bullets. That's the reason they don't use guns. It's not that they don't have them, it's just it's inefficient. So it's not like some of these things aren't in Star Wars. It's just the use of them isn't as prevalent because it doesn't make as much sense. So it doesn't necessarily take me out of Star Wars, but it did look very interesting for the fight sequences, the change. Now, one of the other rumors I've heard is that we're going to see our first lightsaber whip on screen. How do you feel about that?
So I don't. It's one of those things. That's one of the things that was actually in that Star Wars Visions that they did. The thing that's not canon. It's one of those animated things that they did. I don't know if you've ever watched it. They had a lot of different type of lightsabers that they experimented with in that show. And even in some of the old High Republic books, the light whip is a thing. Now, just because it's a thing, though, doesn't mean I'm necessarily excited to see it. And it's kind of one of those things that I feel like they're reaching for something. They're trying to find something that looks cool and is interesting. But it might end up just kind of being like, I don't know, just too much, too different. So I'm excited to see how it's used. It could be really, really cool. When I envision that fight with someone using like a light whip like that, I don't like how I think of it. And, we kind of see a little bit of that in like the sequel trilogy, when the Praetorian guards are fighting Kylo Ren and Rey, they kind of have like whips and stuff like that they're using against them. So we've seen it a little bit. We haven't necessarily seen it as a lightsaber, but just sometimes that stuff can feel a little awkward. And so I'm hoping that's not the case with this. I hope they can make it look really cool and make it something that I'm like, oh man, that would be a cool weapon to have. But I could also see it going really, really wrong.
Well, I've been incredibly disappointed with every single live action representation of a lightsaber since we had Luke destroy the dark troopers.
Yeah.
Since then, we have not had a single good use of a lightsaber for its actual effectiveness with cutting. Everything has seemed like it's a wooden stick. The iconic shot of Obi-Wan Kenobi bouncing his lightsaber off of a stormtrooper's armor and then hitting him a second time. It's just, that's not what a lightsaber is. A lightsaber is this immense cutting machine that slices through things with ease, and it should. There's a reason they're so dangerous, is because they cut through anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lightsaber whip to me will be incredibly dangerous, first off, to wield, because you could kill yourself so easily. But second off, I don't see it grabbing anything. It should be cutting through everything. So I don't really see the point of it. But we also, I just want them to use lightsabers appropriately. I want them to actually cut like they should, like they used to in the prequels. When Obi-Wan fought Anakin, I have the high ground. He didn't knock him into the lava. No, it sliced right through his limbs. And that's what it should look like. It shouldn't. The only time we see a lightsaber cut through something shouldn't be when we stab someone in the stomach and they survive 3 minutes later. Like that should not be the course of action. So I'm just hoping we get to see the lightsabers used appropriately instead of introducing something else that also may not be used appropriately.
Yeah, I think you touched on it. It's just one of those things. It's such an unknown, and we're already not happy with what we have gotten in the past with the type of lightsabers that we currently have. So I feel the same way. I just hope it's done appropriately, rather than one of those things, like I said, that they're just doing just to do. I do not want that. I feel like Star Wars, and I think Disney as a whole, does a lot of that. Just trying to find something that's going to be creative, trying to force something on you when they have the material right there. I don't know anyone that's asked for that. People just want cool lightsabers that do exactly what you do, like cut through things. So I think it could go really well. I also think it could go really bad, and we could just be really disappointed with it. But overall, as a trailer, I think it looked good. I am more intrigued, even more so than I was from the first trailer that we had gotten. And I'm very excited for the show, which I think comes out in June. Um, so how did you feel with the trailer overall?
I thought it was good. I I don't think the protagonists. I one of the things we heard was that they're trying to show the Sith from a good point of view, like that they have a reason for what they're doing. And I just hope they don't try to make the Sith sympathetic. They're Sith. Like, we understand that they're evil. They're always evil. They're fueled by hate. Like, they've given into the dark side. Don't give them a redemption arc that this is like the Jedi are actually evil. Like, I just hope they don't attack it from that angle. That they're actually they're all colonizers. They're horrible. We need to kill them. Like, I just hope they don't go from that aspect. And then the other thing was, I didn't seem like our Jedi counterpart seemed physically to the level of a trained Jedi that I would like to see. And that's just me just like nitpicking, but the Jedis were always like super cool and highly trained, and I just didn't get that from the person who was going to find the apprentice or the Padawan that's going out on her own. So I don't know how I feel about it, but I am very curious.
Yeah, I think curious is a good word for it. And, you used the word interesting, and I really like that word to describe this trailer. It was very interesting. It is exciting, though, that we are getting to see the High Republic in live action. I think that's something everyone's excited for. Up to this point, it's just been comics and books. So I think that's something that's going to be really cool. Now, I've heard some people thinking we might see some Jedi that we're familiar with, because there are some Jedi that live really long times, such as Yoda and stuff like that. Do you think we'll see any Jedi that we know, or do you think this is going to be all brand new characters?
Well, I feel like we may have already. I feel like we may get some lesser known characters that we see, but I don't think we're gonna get to see any mainstream characters. I don't
Okay.
like. I don't think we're gonna see Yoda.
I think I feel the same way. I think if we do see him, it would be like at the end of the show, kind of in like a not necessarily an in creditsy type way, but kind of. I could see us seeing him right at the end and him being like, "All right, well, we dealt with the Sith," something to that effect, or him, even saying like they'll be back. I could see something like that being portrayed, but I don't necessarily think we will get like a full blown Yoda out there flipping around, young Yoda fighting. I definitely don't think we'll get that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they give us just a little bit of something.
Yeah, which I mean, I'm not going to be complaining about that as long as it's used appropriately.
Yeah, it's one of those things we don't want them to do just for the sake of doing it.
Yep, cannon fodder, just packed in there to try to appease somebody or get somebody to go, "Ooh, look at this!" That's never good.
It's Yoda.
It's Yoda. We love it. Well, maybe maybe we do if it's used appropriately. I think a lot of the times when you go back and you make something to this extent, you risk messing stuff up. But one of the things I really am excited for is the the Sith look, the
Yeah.
mask that I'm assuming that's her. Her mask is amazing with the smile
Yeah.
and the teeth.
Yep.
That looks pretty sick. So I'm excited to see what they do with it and see how well they put it together.
Yep, I definitely hope we get a Funko Pop of that Sith, because I think that would be one killer Funko Pop. But other than that, that's all the Star Wars talk that we have for you guys this week. Zane, did you have any other things that you wanted to touch on that I may have missed?
No, I think that was good. Sorry, my mind's not working as well as it usually does with not feeling great and not having the energy that I usually do. So I do apologize if it seemed like I was sloppy tonight. And then also just with Jacob being so busy in the future, and then I actually was diagnosed with lymphoma the last few weeks. So depending on how that goes, it's stage 1. highly treatable. So we're praising the Lord that He allowed us to find it early, and that it is, we have a path forward. But depending on how treatments go with that, we may not be as consistent as we wish to. Just kind of want to let you guys know, if we are absent, that's probably why.
Yeah, like you just said, lots of things going on, but we will be eventually getting through these stages of our life, and we'll be able to get right back to a better, more consistent thing, which we've done a really good job of staying consistent, even with everything that's gone on. But I think we're really excited for the future of the podcast. I think we talk about it all the time, but really once things start to get settled down, I think you guys are going to be in for a real treat with some of the awesome ideas that we have. But as far as this week's episode of Weekly Fix goes, that is going to do it. Thank you guys so much for listening to us as always, and we can't wait to talk to you guys in the next one.